Moses, thank you for joining me for round 3 today.
Oh man, thanks for having me.
So for everybody listening, Moses and I have become what I consider really good friends over the last couple of years. And, it's been a couple of years since ReTwit kind of formed and started. I think we're kind of still evolving and learning, and more people are joining. And, for a long time, my wife would be like, how's your friend Moses in LA doing? Moses was talked about like a lot of my friends. And so, I kind of want to kick off today's conversation with, someone who I hold in high regard. We've formed this ReTwit community, which for people that haven't been involved can sound really weird, having like these internet friends and this internet life. And so I just kind of wanted to start off by just kind of having you just riff a little bit on where you've been in this kind of journey and like how you see it kind of where you are today.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll echo that. My wife also is like, "What's wrong with you?" I mean, she says that about a lot of things, but specifically about my my Twitter obsession. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, so I have found my engagement with the real estate Twitter community to be literally life changing, and I don't say that lightly. Like, uh, most importantly, like meeting friends and kind of like mentors like you and some other people, but also we've raised a lot of capital from people who we've met via Twitter. Um, we have, I mean, the conference that, or the, I guess I should call it an event that we put on, ReConvene, which was important for my career, and I think will continue to be important for my career, was a direct outgrowth of that. Um, and really, I mean, I guess almost more than the almost into maybe even more important for my like intellectual development has just been exposure to a whole bunch of people from outside my bubble, both professionally and like just in life. And I mean, I don't think you can get that anywhere else. And I think it's just been incredibly like mind expanding for me.
So if and I echo so many of what you said. We all live in our bubbles. We're all surrounded by kind of the same ideas, and most of the time, they're great, but hearing from outside opinions is huge. Raising capital's been great, finding deals. But for someone that's kind of done it for 2 to 3 years, and maybe, we kind of both started around the same time. I think you were a little earlier than me. The first year was like, oh my gosh, there's all these people. This is awesome. I'm making friends. And then you kind of mature into it. I don't know how to ask this question, but if I said, what do you think the next 2 or 3 years for you looks like, knowing that you've kind of like set a foundation, you've kind of met a lot of people, what we're going to talk about ReConvene, like how did the next 3 years get better for you as opposed to like burning out?
That's a really good question. I mean, I have maybe a little bit of a like personality advantage in this sense because I really would have been a teacher if I were like a less greedy person. Um, uh, and so I derive an enormous amount of personal satisfaction from both the learning and also the teaching aspect of it. And I mean that not just when I say learning, I mean it. I mean, of course, it's valuable for my business to learn new things. Like, I'm honestly looking at like almost like a flex industrial deal right now, which we're probably not going to do, but like to a large extent because of your influence, right? So there's that element, but it's also just like I like learning for its own sake, and I like teaching for its own sake. So I do not experience my interaction on real estate Twitter at like as something that would cause me burnout. It actually the opposite. I derive energy from it, and it's a little bit part of what's so problematic about it actually from my perspective, and I guess from my wife's perspective as well, is that it's like, it's clear that when you're on Instagram for hours, you're doing something dumb. Like it's bad. Like you should not do that. For me, it's very often the case that being on Twitter is like the highest and best use of my time for a variety of reasons. And so it's like that it's hard to stop something that is both addictive and also good for you,
Yeah, yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yep. How when you're like telling people about your Twitter life, or kind of this world you build on Twitter, how do you kind of explain it to them? All these people, and they're sharing all the time, and they're meeting and they're learning. A lot of people look at me like I'm crazy. Is that kind of the same kind of feedback you get, or like, how do you kind of tell people about what you're up to?
Um, yeah, it's yeah. So certainly there's a bunch of people both in and out of the real estate business who are like, "What are you talking about? Like what? Like." Um, so there's that. I mean, I always kind of like go back to the story about how we built our business from the first place in the first place, which was, I didn't have. I mean, I had a decent network compared to a lot of people in terms of access to capital, but no, I'm not. I wasn't raised on country clubs. Like, my parents were hippies. Like, we didn't have. I didn't have like a bunch of like rich people who invested in, who are used to investing in private deals when I wanted to get into the space. I mean, I had enough to get started. I'm very fortunate for that. But um, I, to a very large extent, we built our capital base from me writing a blog, which is a great medium in a lot of ways, but doesn't have the same distribution that Twitter does. Like you're depending on Google to sort of like find your what you write, and it works. It worked for us, um, but Twitter comes with built-in distribution in kind of like a better way. So my point is to say that like I view it, and I think it's easier for me to explain it to other people as effectively like an extension of things that we were already doing that were successful for us.
Okay, and taking that a step further, so we made all these friends, we kind of created and organized, and I think when people hear about it, it's like ReTwit is not some like thing you log into, and it's just a community of people that seem to kind of get along on Twitter. You took it a step further and you said, I'm going to get everybody together in real life, and I'm going to put a conference on that really kind of hits on the key things that have driven this community to be successful. What was your experience like, man? I mean, I know what my experience was like as a guest. It was incredible. But what did you learn from all this? Not only like how to throw an event, but like, what does this mean for the world that all these people can get to know each other online and then like love each other even more in person?
Well, let me talk about first kind of my motivation for doing it, and then we could talk maybe about like what the result was. One of the things I experienced, and I expect you did too, is that while there is plenty of content out there for like kind of like generic real estate investing, there's like, how to be a landlord for dummies or whatever. And there are even more sophisticated books. There actually is, relatively speaking, like a dearth of content for people who are specifically in the real estate private equity business. And even more specifically, and this is a topic that you have done a lot of work on, and I appreciate it very much. Um, Abstracting up one level so you can read about what a private real estate private equity deal is, like what a pref is, what a promote is, like all that stuff. But the next question is like, how do you build a sustainable firm? Like how do you go from just a person to having a firm with like repeatable processes and repeat investors and making enough money that you can live while you're waiting for your promotes to mature. I really, there's just really not a lot out there. It's fundamentally an apprenticeship business where you learn because your dad did it or because you happen to find the right mentors. And I personally had neither of those things. So I had to kind of like figure out a lot of stuff, and I made a ton of mistakes. And so part of, I think, the magic of the real estate Twitter community and the rationale for doing the event was that there's this real hunger for like, how do you do this? Like, how do you build a career at a firm in this space? And it's in part because it's a pretty lonely business sometimes, particularly when you're getting started. Like, you don't really talk to your peers that much. You talk to brokers, you talk to investors, but you don't necessarily talk to a lot of other people trying to bootstrap these firms. So anyway, I felt like there was like a lack of content in that area, and it was one that that's a bunch of information that's really valuable to a very small but actually quite potentially quite wealthy community. So it's like it seemed like a great niche, right? Like from a business perspective, it's like, look, get a bunch of people who actually have some dough, who really could benefit from learning from each other. And so that was really the impetus. In terms of how we felt after it was over, I mean, honestly, at first of all, I was like, okay, relief that it wasn't a like flaming disaster.
Were you were you nervous as hell like the day before?
Oh my God, yeah. And I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think you could probably tell from how I was speaking, and yeah. I mean, I hope you couldn't tell, but I think you probably could. Thank you. Yeah, no, it's insanely nerve wracking. It's like, you're holding a wedding for a lot of people, but like they're paying you to come. And so their expectations are that it not be a disaster. So I had a lot of faith. My wife kind of organized it. And I have an enormous amount of faith in her. She's an enormously competent human being. And so but she was nervous and I was really nervous. And so anyway, so when it was over, it was like, okay, first of all, like, thank God this wasn't a disaster. And then, I sort of watched the videos and started hearing from people that it more than not just being a disaster was actually something that was useful. And so that obviously is a great feeling. And we're, working actively on planning next year's event. And I guess maybe something else to say is we made some money, like not like life-changing money, but, like decent money for the amount of effort that we put into it. And one of the interesting things is there's like a knock-on effect on our business, which is to say that like I'm honestly like a little less hungry to do deals right now than I might. So like on the margin where I'm like thinking about, do I want to do this next deal or not? I'm like honestly, my quality bar probably went up. I don't know if I want to like try to quantify it in percentage terms or something, but it's just like, you know what? Like if we don't do a deal like next year or whatever, like, we're fine,
That's awesome. Yeah, well, maybe we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. You got feedback. You sent a survey out. You talked to a lot of people. Was there anything like that stood out on the feedback from this year? And then maybe how that'll translate into maybe something that changes next year, or that maybe you do better next year or don't do at all?
Yeah, a fantastic question. We were actually out scouting events last night with my wife. Scouting venues last night with my wife and a woman who helped her organize, and a guy who's a good friend of ours who attended the event. So we were talking about this. A couple things. One is like, it's cool to be in LA. Hollywood is maybe not the best location in LA, and we will not repeat that going forward. We were a little bit handicapped by COVID in terms of the possible venue options. Like a lot of like theaters were literally not answering their phone calls when we were having to book the venue. So this year we're much less constrained in terms of location choices. So we can do some maybe better with that. The other thing is the speakers that we chose. There's this like tension between wanting to choose people who are relatable, and also but also people who are worthy of being listened to, people who have had real demonstrable success, right? And like I kind of opted for maybe more like the latter. Like it's just awesome for me to hear from you and Keith, and but I think for some of the people who attended, it might have been helpful to hear from people who are like a little bit earlier career-wise, because it's more relatable. So we're probably going to try to work that in. And then the final thing I'll say is that I think we had like 5 female attendees out of like 215 people. And we're gonna work on that. Our business is obviously overwhelmingly male, so it's never going to be 50-50, but like we could definitely do a better job of getting women there. So we're going to work on that.
When you you kind of said quality bar, and when I think about you, not only in how you write, but just how you kind of stick to your guns and you don't really waver. You put a high emphasis on quality kind of across your life. You said that maybe the event business, some of that income could also offset the desire for you to need to do the next deal. but let's kind of get into quality. And specifically as it relates to kind of what your expectations are right now for finding a deal, not only in your value add strategy, but I really want to start keying in on this new strategy that you have kind of launched. So maybe let's start with the new strategy, which is a high quality building built. Kind of tell me, what was the impetus and what are you doing there?
Yeah, it actually comes from some observations in the value add business. Um, so the bar that we use for value add deals is that we would like the unlevered yield on cost to materially exceed the loan constant that we expect when we go to refinance a project. So we buy a building that's all screwed up, we fix it, we raise the rents, and we want the yield at that point to materially exceed basically like the cost of the debt. Like the loan constant's like another way of saying the cost of the debt, factoring in the amortization and treating the amortization as sort of like the same thing as interest. And we can talk about why we do that in a second if you want. But that's a pretty strict quantitative threshold, and the reason we do it is sort of twofold. One is it's a good quality bar in and of itself. It sort of like forces you to actually be adding value. Like it sort of strips away. It strips away your pretensions or like financial engineering. It's like are we making something with a yield? Are we adding real value? Are we making something with a yield that really exceeds market? The other thing is, more practically, when you do that, it allows you to refinance out like the vast majority of the capital employed in the project, and to have a cash on cash yield on the stub equity that remains that's like really high. Like historically we've like refinanced out all the money and then the yield is infinite because there's no money left in it, or we leave 10% in and there's a 50% cash on cash yield on what remains. Like the numbers just get stupid. And those are like, it's like, you should definitely do those deals if you can do them, right? It's like the problem basically since COVID, to be honest, is that the numbers are out of whack. So whereas the loan constant right now for these kind of buildings, like is going to on the refi, you kind of like you're expecting that the loan constant's going to be like in the high fives, just based on like where interest rates are and their 30-year amortization loans, and so the loan constant's going to be like in the mid to high fives, which means that you really want an unlevered yield of like 6+. 6.25. And it's just like I can't lie to myself. Like the stuff we're underwriting is like 5 or 5.25. And it's like, it just doesn't make sense. Like it's just like not worth the hassle and the risk and everything. So that's what led us to the core strategy, because if I'm underwriting a 5 for taking, and we can talk about what's involved in renovating one of these buildings, but it's an enormous amount of hassle and risk and time. If I'm going to get a 5 for doing that, and I can, on the other hand, just like go across the street and buy a brand new non-rent control building that's stable at a 4 and fix long-term interest-only financing on it, that seems like a better deal. It's just a better thing to do with money right now. I mean, one thing to say is that I don't conceive of my business, like I'm not a capital allocator in the sense that I'm not like sitting next to this rich guy with my arm around him being like, you should put X amount of your capital in the S&P and Y amount in Class B in industrial in Dallas, and an X% in Los Angeles multifamily. Like I'm not smart enough to do that. So my job is to take someone who's like, I would like to allocate some money to Los Angeles multifamily, and then figure out what the smartest thing for that person to do is. Like, what is the best way to invest in apartments in Los Angeles? And kind of what I'm finding right now is, absent maybe we should set aside opportunity zones, because the tax benefits might make it so that it's worth doing value add there. But absent the tax benefits of opportunity zones, or maybe a reverse 1031 exchange if you want to get really in the weeds. It just doesn't make sense with fresh capital to do value add deals right now. So it's the smarter thing to do is to just buy these core buildings, and so that's what we're doing.
Okay, real quick, you were talking about like your unlevered yield on cost is getting right now to, you said like 5.25, but did you say that rates to recap are in the mid fives? I would have thought they were in like the mid twos.
No,
Did I hear you wrong?
Right now rates are probably like 3.75.
Okay.
But you can't, and this is maybe a quirk of the LA market. You can't get a cash out refi that's interest only for any length of time right now, at least not without having the thing stable for a year, and not without, and particularly if it's a smaller project. Like you can't take as given that the numbers we're talking about are for like sub-institutional deals. If you want to try to value add like a $15 million deal, forget it. You're not even going to get to 5.25 right now. I mean, you're going to be worse than that. So for these small scale deals, when you factor in the amortization, that if you just take like, that's what I mean by the loan cost
Amortization. So I got it.
If you factor in the amortization, which, we can have a debate about that. It's like a whole other interesting conversation. But in the real estate private equity business, like amortization is a disaster, right? Like you pay the taxes on that money obviously the interest is tax shielded. It's a write-off from a tax perspective, but you're paying the amortization with after-tax money. So it's just a question of, should that after-tax money go to the investors or to the government? It's like it should go to the investors. So you want interest-only loans. That's just not available for cash-out refis on the size deals that we're talking about. So what you end up with is, from the investor's perspective, the cost of that loan isn't 375; it's 5.5 or whatever.
I gotcha. Interesting. Okay. And just to be clear, when you were saying you can't cash out refi within a year, you do things all cash. Do banks still not even care about that? They want to see that you've owned the asset a year, irrespective of whether you've had a loan on it for a year or not?
There are banks who, so the biggest banks with the cheapest capital will let your Wells or your JP Morgan Chase or whatever. They want to see a year of stabilized operations at the new rent roll before they will cash you out in a meaningful way. There is a tier of like local and regional banks that make their living, basically. Their capital is more expensive than the big guys, but they make their living by being willing to cash you out, like with a couple of months of stabilized operations. So and that's traditionally so your choice to get these cash out refis is those local regional banks or the agencies. And both of them have become considerably more gun shy about cash out refis, in part because we still have the stupid eviction moratorium. So they're worried, on top of everything else, the normal lender concern about cashing people out. They're also worried that your tenants are going to stop paying rent and you're not going to be able to do anything about it. So which means that they're compressing the amount of proceeds that they're willing to let you take out.
Got it. All right, I'll just ask a dumb question. What would all the buyers that are buying this shit right now say? Would they just say, hey, I have different underwriting, or hey, I'm willing to take less return, or hey, I'm just using cash, I'm not using debt? Like, what's the argument to the flip side if this stuff keeps flying off the shelf?
I think it's a mix of things. One is, look, there's a certain incentive. You and I both know this, that like GPs have, like, what is the line? Like, that they're going to keep playing the music, you're going to have to keep dancing. Like, there's an element of like, my business is to put capital out, and so I'm going to just close my eyes and put capital out and like hope it works out well. And by the way, it's like a coin flip where like heads I win and tails my investors lose. So I'll talk myself into doing whatever I need to do to keep doing that. So that's like maybe the most cynical way of looking at it. Another thing to say is that we have a portfolio of stabilized buildings that we've owned for like 10 plus years now. And so we have very good data on operating expenses. And so, which I do not believe that most buyers have access to. And so one of the things that's going on is that they're talking themselves into doing things because they're basically like underestimating the OpEx and therefore overestimating the yield. So that's one. Another thing is we have, I think, 10 or 12 different properties under renovation right now. And so we're constantly in the market for construction services and buying materials. So we know what the renovations are going to cost. And it's like right now, it's like eye watering for various reasons. And so I think there's a lot of people who buy a building and they're like, look, I'm going to gut reno it and it's going to be 40 grand a door. And you're just like, no, it's not. You know what I mean? Like not even close. But by the time they've bought the building, it's already too late, right? Like you can't, and there's no way, like one of the jokes that I always make is that like, I wish I could short some deals. Like there's not a mechanism for shorting real estate deals, right? So like, I can't, I am 100% confident that people buying some of these things are going to lose money unless they get bailed out by interest rates continuing to fall or something. But I can't, like, you can't express that in any meaningful, like, financial way. So it's just like, well, you just screwed that deal up for me. I can't buy it now. And like, you're probably going to lose money on it. But like, that's just, it's kind of like your problem and your investor's problem. But like, I can't, I can't do anything with that insight.
Yep. Strip mall guy said it the other day. He said, I think like experienced investors are losing out to inexperienced investors. And it's kind of what you just described is like, I don't think they fully know the deal that they're buying. They know what the spreadsheet told them they're buying, but as you and I know, spreadsheets and reality can be very, very, live in two different worlds.
Yeah. I think even if you had all of the underwriting numbers right today in Los Angeles, the construction timelines are just 50% longer than they used to be. Like, how do you factor in, it takes twice as long to get permits right now. And like, every inspector who used to be able to get out in 2 days takes 2 weeks. And so if you're not constantly doing that, you don't know. You're like, oh, it takes however long it takes to renovate a building. It's like, nope, it takes 50% longer. So anyway, so I basically think that it's for the most part, it's a low barrier to entry business, particularly on this sub-institutional side. Like it's not hard to raise a couple $1 million and go buy a building. And, like, knock yourself out, but like the likelihood is that you're probably underestimating a bunch of the costs and everything.
Yeah, it's probably not as relevant in LA. Maybe it is, but in Texas, if you've kind of done well, everybody wants to build their own office building for themselves. There's lots of land you can, and people always come to me and they're like, "Hey, I want to do this," and I'm like, "Dude, you're better off overpaying for that building down the street by $100 and living a better life than you are." Oh, we'll get it done in a year, blah, blah, blah. It's like, dude, it's a 3 or 4 year deal. It's a lot of years off your life. Don't do it. Okay, we're going to talk about the new stuff that you're buying, but I want to keep going down this a little bit. You've built a company on this value add strategy, sub-institutional, smaller deals in LA. The world's giving you what it's giving you right now. You're just going to keep, is Moses going to stay disciplined and keep just waiting for something to change? Like, how are you processing all this? You have to, on one end, be getting a little bit stir crazy, and on the other, you've done really good at being patient. And we'll talk about the fund that you raised, which I give you tremendous credit for. But like, how are you feeling about all this?
I'm not feeling great.
I mean, you stir crazy?
Am I getting stir crazy? No. I mean, look, the good news is I've had a combination of these core deals to distract me. I've had planning the event, real estate Twitter, and like I have a steady stream of people reaching out to me like for advice all the time because of Twitter. So it's like, okay, I've got more time. I'll just like take more of those calls or whatever. So I'm not going stir crazy in that sense. We also have, like I said, we have a lot of projects that are in progress and like going into lease up and all that stuff. So and refinance is going on. So there's plenty to do. but I mean, yeah, it's not a great feeling to feel like you had this business that really produced some pretty spectacular results for a very long time, albeit with a ton of brain damage and sweat and you know, um, so it's not a great feeling. But I mean, look, like you talked about the fund. Like we raised a bunch of money last summer with the idea that maybe there were going to be a lot of landlords who threw in the towel after the eviction moratorium and everything, and turned out not to be the case. And we're basically released all the capital from that fund without having put out a dollar of it. That's like that's a terrible feeling on the one hand. I mean, it's like there's a lot of time and effort and money that went into making that fund, and a lot of people, a lot of relationships and all that stuff. And the idea of sort of not being able to put it out is heartbreaking. But on the other hand, like I can't emphasize it. This is going to sound really hokey. I hope that my children can raise money from the children of our current investors, like 30 years from now or whatever. So, like viewed from that perspective, if the choice is to do a bunch of like mediocre shit that like is not going to work out well for our partners, or go figure out some other way to make money, like I'm going to choose the latter because the relationships are more important. I firmly believe that we will eventually have a cycle again. Who knows when that is? There will be opportunities to do this value add stuff. We will do a bunch of it at that time, and I want to be able to call these people and have them not hang up on me. So it was honestly like a pretty easy decision to make.
For anybody listening to this, I just want to make this really clear of what happened and how this is, especially in today's market, almost unheard of. Moses went out and raised 30, was it 30 million? How much did you raise?
23.
$23 million last year, and thought, I'm going to put this money to work as a response to some opportunities that are going to come up in COVID. As we're living in a world where NFTs are selling for $1 trillion and Elon Musk made $100 billion in the last 6 months in net worth, and things are going bananas, Moses decided to not spend $1 of that fund because it didn't meet his requirements. I mean, it's almost unheard of. And that's somebody that sticks to their guns. I have a tremendous amount of respect for it. So one just question I just kind of have is, what was the investor reaction? Was everybody like, damn, dude, like I love you 10 times more because now I know when you tell me you're going to do something, you're going to do it? Or was anybody like, man, you like put it to work? I need it to work.
Honestly, a couple of people had that latter reaction. And like the truth is, well, I want to put this delicately. I am utterly uninterested in one-off relationships with people. I don't put any value on that. In some ways, maybe I undervalue that. Like it's actually good to just make money and like part ways. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But for whatever reason, I'm just like not built like that. So, so someone who says that to me, it's like, in some ways it's kind of like, okay, like we're probably not the right fit going forward. And like, it actually may not be the worst thing in the world that we didn't buy a building with the intention of owning it together forever. Like maybe that marriage would have ended up badly anyway. So better not to have got married. But with the exception of those people, I think the feedback has been extremely positive. What we did specifically is we said, look, anyone who wants can be out right now. If you want to stay in, we want permission to buy these core deals because we think that's the smartest thing to do right now. And we want to extend the investment period by another year. Basically, we burned a year where we couldn't find anything. So we're saying you can be out if you want now, or stay in and extend for an extra year. And frankly, like the response that has been mixed. Like a bunch of people are like, look, we're only interested in the value add strategy. So thank you for your discipline, but we're out, which is a totally reasonable response. And I sort of like was at pains over and over and over again to be like, I am not going to take this personally. We're not going to have hard feelings about it, because they signed up for a strategy that we couldn't make work. And like, so that's why we're giving them the opportunity to be out. And so it would be for me to then get upset that they didn't stay in is ridiculous. So we've had a mix. Like some people are like, look, thanks a lot, but call us back when you're ready to do another one of these and we'll definitely be in. And other people are like, look, we want to put money in Los Angeles real estate, and if you tell us that core deals are the smartest thing to do, let's do that. The coolest response by far was this guy who's like multiple, long time LP of ours now. He's just this awesome guy he's been an executive at a series of PE backed companies, and he's made a lot of money on exits. And so this is like a way for him to take some of that money and put it into real estate. And is like the best, most like hands-off, awesome dude. Just like talks to me very rare. He's super bright and incisive when we do talk, but like mostly leaves me alone. But he wrote to me and he was like, look, I'm investing in these core deals with you on a deal by deal basis anyway. I guess I would prefer to do that as opposed to being in the fund. But if my commitment to the fund is the difference between you moving forward with the fund and not, I will be in the fund. In other words, saying like, I trust you so much and I appreciate what you did so much that you tell me what's best for you and I'll do that. And like, that's the kind of partner that I want. Like that's the kind of partner I want to be, and that's the kind of partner I want. And we'll see what happens, like whether, where we end up. We haven't kind of got enough decisions from people yet. They still have another couple of weeks to decide. But that's who I want to be in business with, if that makes sense.
Those are like family. That's like a family. I mean,
that's a guy who, and like I would run through walls for that guy. And so would my partner, and so would our organization. And that's, and we would put up with a lot to safeguard that guy's capital and keep the promises that we made to him.
And to anybody listening, is like that relationship takes years and years and years to build. If that gentleman that you just mentioned came and met me, even with a track record, like it would take years for me to be able to get to a point with him where he would say that. And it's value that you can't quantify on paper, but it is the most valuable part of our business.
Totally.
Real estate's not cheap.
Our businesses don't exist without that level of trust. I mean, that one is a particularly high level of trust, but like fundamentally, real estate private equity requires someone else's private equity. That's the business. So you lose that trust or you fail to build it in the first place and you have no business.
When does private equity turn into non-private equity? It's like, I guess once it's your own family office is when you can shield the private equity part of it.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's just talk about LA just for a little bit before we start talking about the new strategy. So, and this isn't LA specific, but the eviction moratorium. I'm in industrial. I have not had to deal with this. From my perspective today is there was some moratorium that basically said you can't evict people for a period of time. Was that all people or was that some people? How have you interpreted what's going on and specifically what's going on in LA?
Yeah. So, there's the national eviction moratorium, the CDC one, but honestly, it wasn't relevant in LA because we had a much more stringent one here. Basically, the LA one is actually even stricter than the state of California eviction moratorium is over, but LA has one that's even stricter, and it basically says that you can't evict anyone for non-payment as long as they say that they are COVID impacted. And there's no they just have to say I'm COVID impacted.
It's literally just like, there's no proof. It's just, okay.
And that state of emergency persists until the mayor declares it over, or there's like some deadline in like spring of 2022 or 23 or spring of 2023, I think. So the problem with a program like that, and the apartment owners really screwed up in the politics around this, is that like which mayor is going to be like, oh, the eviction moratorium's over? Like no chance. Like what's the political upside for anyone to declare this over? Like there is no political upside, right? Like so basically like we're probably, it's not going to be over until whatever that long deadline is. And, of course, people who are my old housekeeper lost all of her clients during COVID because a lot of people were like, she had stopped working for us years ago, but she lost all of her clients because people didn't want a housekeeper, understandably. And so she can't pay her rent right now. So that woman, like, she should not be homeless. There is a strong argument for protecting that person. Full stop. the argument is much less clear for someone who moves into like a $4,000 apartment and then like 2 months later is like, nah, you know what? I don't feel like paying rent right now. Like that's just to me, and the fact that like we're not separating those two
Okay, so it's not
situations
separated.
is just it's like nonsense.
So are your people paying?
Yeah, luckily, and this is
And is this just out of the goodness of their heart at this point?
I mean, look, the back rent is collectible. So at some point, it's just not collectible via eviction. It's like we could go sue people and stuff like that. I mean, I really don't. It's like my nightmare is doing that.
Yeah, you want that like you want a hole in your head.
Yeah. So goodness of their heart. Like the truth is, so we've collected kind of like 92, 93% of the money all the way through. And look, we run pretty high-end apartments, and our tenants tend to be pretty like people who are pretty like financially responsible and have good jobs. And so for the most part, they've lived up to their end of the bargain, which I can't tell you how much I appreciate. Like obviously there are like random people who don't, and some of them are actually COVID impacted, and a few of them probably aren't. But the vast majority of people have kept their word, and I'm incredibly thankful. And if you had asked me, I'm like by nature somewhat of a cynical person. And if you had asked me before this what percentage of people would have paid, I would have guessed much lower than what actually happened. And I guess maybe I'll say we talked about this during the COVID episode, whenever that was, like a year and a half ago, whatever it was. We got some advice from our largest investor at that point, which was, he's like, look, I've been through a lot of cycles. Don't freak out. Like, tell your tenants not to freak out. Tell them it's going to be okay. Tell them you're going to work with them and we're going to figure it out together. And we did that. And I think that was like incredibly good advice. Like it set a tone with all of our tenants of like, we're in it together. We're going to figure it out. And a lot of people didn't do that, and they were aggressive, and there were rent strikes and all kinds of crazy stuff that happened. And we mostly avoided that kind of stuff. And I think it's honestly because our tone and the way we've handled our relationships with our tenants all the way through has been like pretty. We've acted like partners to them, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
That's great, man. So if somebody's coming to lease a vacancy right now and everything checks out, are you like, all right, we're going to sign this, but you got to pay?
I mean, look, you do the best you can, but and I'll tell you, one of the like obvious unintended consequences of this regulation is we've tightened up our application criteria. I mean, you have to. You can't. You got to be insane not to. And it's really unfair because there's a lot of people. I like firmly believe that people should have second chances in life. Like, there's a lot of people do dumb stuff, particularly like in their early adulthood, and it breaks my heart that to have people's like entire lives or big portions of their lives ruined by that kind of stuff. So I'm just like personally in favor of second chances. And the problem is that when you have this kind of regulation, it's much harder to take a chance on a marginal applicant, because you're just like, I can't get stuck with someone who's going to keep my apartment for an indefinite period of time and not pay me. So you like default to wanting co-signers. And then it's like, well, okay, so it's great for the rich kids who have rich parents who are strong co-signers, but what about the kids who don't have that? And it's just like, it's really, it's awful. And it makes me feel bad as a manager, but I got to do what's right for our investors and the property owners that we manage for. Yeah.
Yeah. At the end of the day, your investors are not hiring you to, at some level, you got to, do the right thing for making.
We're providing a service, whole. and we have, God knows, the service that we provide is regulated in the sense of like, we have to fix the building when it breaks, and it's got to be safe and clean. And we spend an awful lot of money and time and everything doing that. And you got to get paid for that.